in the past we've had people give the other side for young earth creationism, and I'm quite happy in the future for this to go on, so that we actually build up some sort of body of knowledge to help us become better informed. So I do kind of plead with you to treat people who disagree with you with respect, and to not to attempt to shame people to believe what you believe, but to give people freedom to learn. So, without any more to do, I'll ask Ian to give his presentation. So thanks for being so brave.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin.
Do you want to do the
I hope you can hear me.
Want to put a microphone
on?
I'm a bit of a sore throat, and we don't have a microphone apparently, so if my voice does start
It's
popping
going to get
way,
picked up on
you can
camera.
speak up or something like that.
You can move it if you like. Do you want to come around slightly?
Actually, the title I gave Kevin was Why I'm Not a Creationist, and that's the young earth has crept in, and I'm not quite sure what the two different sorts, or what the other sort is, but I'll tell you in a little while what it is that I'm not. I'll come to that a bit later. So, my aim tonight, as Kevin said, there are people in the Christian faith with different views on this matter, and I'm not actually trying to convert anyone to my view, or my goal is not to criticise other people's views, though I'm afraid I probably will be doing that implicitly what I do. But what I do want to show is there's a way of looking at creation and looking at Christian beliefs that doesn't conflict with the scientific approach. So what am I going to do? Well, this talk is why I am not a creationist, and as I say, it's not necessarily about whether you should be or not. So I'm going to talk a bit about myself and where I've come from and my history and what's led me to where I am. Then I'm going to talk a bit about science and what it is, and my understanding of the methods and the reason behind science. I'm going to have a bit of a comment on the fact that I don't like being labelled as an ist or an evolutionist or a creationist or whatever it is, and I'll tell you a bit more about that as well. Then I'll get on to why I have problems with creationism and the title of the talk. Then I suppose I better tell you what I do believe. It's not creationism. And then I want to say a bit about why it matters and why I think we need to have these my viewpoints at this part of what we can take as an option.
Can I just interrupt you, Ian?
Yeah.
Do you mind if you actually put the stand over to the left so that the video camera picks up both the screen and you?
Somehow to change the slides.
Do you want me to do that? Do you want me to
Yes,
change the
okay.
slide?
Okay.
I did see Matt Gray just tap the side of the screen, so you could try that and see if it works.
That probably does work.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
right there.
it's over on the other side,
Did he
unfortunately.
drag that over? No, he didn't use
Yep,
it.
you grab that and drag it over, and then, yeah, there she goes.
Wow. Get out of here. This is the 21st century after all.
My background is in dealing with complicated technology and getting to work. So my background, I started out as a mathematician. I did a degree in maths at Oxford. And, a little while after that, came to Australia to work for CSIRO, and while I was here, got a PhD in statistics at the Australian National University. And I've worked for CSIRO and various universities in and out a bit as a statistician in scientific areas for just about 40 years. And just to prove that, I retired 2 weeks ago yesterday. Here's my first paper, 1973, on the rotation of the Earth's magnetic field, which I did on a vacation job at the Royal Greenwich Observatory at first onset. This is not quite my last one, but some are still going through the process. And that's on evidential linkage to chromosomes 10p blah 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 in non-syndromic colorectal cancer families, which is a study of the genetic impact of colorectal cancer, one of the major causes of cancer death. I became a Christian in 1973, about the same time that first paper was being published, so my career in science and my career, whatever you want to call it, as a Christian, started at the same time. And so my views on both these sides of things have been developing in parallel, and it's been important to me that they are linked, not seen as different. So I do Christian stuff on Sunday and the rest of the week. It's part of my life. And I guess even before then I was trying to understand how to reconcile my perception, if you like, of the universe with reality. It's a philosophical issue, if you like. And when I came across Christianity and really got to understand it better, it actually made sense. Now, that's not my goal tonight to talk about that, so I'm going to pass that over. Very happy to talk to people about that another time, but that's not where I'm focusing today. Good. So I want to talk a bit about science, and are there two different worldviews here between the religious one, the Christian one, and the scientific one? So what's the scientific one? Well, science developed from basically dissatisfaction with the approach that was the medieval one of looking back to in history. What did Aristotle say about this? That includes the truth. We don't need to go worrying about doing experiments. And the horses, there's a story which I'm sure isn't true about the medieval philosophers who would sit in a room and talk about how many teeth a horse had, and they were sure it was somewhere in Aristotle, but they couldn't quite find it. And the person who suggested they go out and look at a horse was promptly thrown out of the room, being quite ridiculous. You shouldn't actually do that. I'm pretty sure that's not true. It's a really good story in there. So the scientific approach was a reaction against that, and it said, let's use the results of observation. Let's actually go and look at a horse, and we'll use that to try and understand what's going on in the universe. And if we have theories that don't match observations, if Aristotle says a horse has 47 teeth, we go out and find it's actually got 40, then so much the worse for Aristotle. We'll go along with the data. So, an issue here, can we fit this in with an all-powerful God who's given and is the final authority? And what we're saying here is we don't want the final authority, we'll go and find out for ourselves. Let's go on a bit more with science. So, 17th century, Dr. Blake on the introduction of final causes into physics has displaced the investigation of physical causes in Plato, Aristotle, Galen, and many others. Now, what does he mean by final causes? That's things like saying, why does iron sink in water? Because it is the nature of iron to sink the earth and sink. Why does wood float? It's because it's the nature of wood to sink the air and rise. Final cause, no more questions. It's their nature, that's all we need to know. And Baker was saying, no, that's no good. Let's go and try and find something like density, a common thing which will link iron and wood and tell us something, and allow us to make predictions about other things that might happen as well. And the principle of science, I think, is well expressed by Michael Faraday a bit later than that, 1839. Although I cannot honestly say that I wish to be found in error, I fervently hope that this work will one day belong to the bygone parts of science. So this is one of his key books on electricity, and he's saying that I hope this will be superseded by other people's discoveries. And that's the idea of science. Looking for truth using observation and experiment, not relying on untested authorities. And that's the basis. And I thought of writing Love Your Colleague as yourself down the bottom there, but that probably would be a bit too hard for most scientists. But love your colleagues' results are your own, maybe, is what you say. We'll take their results and my results, and we'll compare them, and hopefully mine are right, and I'll try and prove they're wrong. But we'll trust them. Just an example, an early example, where you heard of phlogiston. 1703, we had a theory of combustion. When things burn, it's pretty obvious what happens. Everything burning looks more or less the same, and stuff comes out, smoke and flames and everything. So it's clear what's probably happening is there's a common feature of all of these things, that they contain something or other that's coming out when you burn them. And it was called various names, but Georg Stahl was the one who gave it the name that stuck, which was phlogiston. So the phlogiston theory of combustion was phlogiston's in the wood or the paper or whatever. When you burn it, out it comes. And that seemed to explain all of the results for quite a while. But then the various things started coming up that didn't quite fit with that model, and in particular, 70 years later, Antoine Lavoisier put the final nail in the coffin of phlogiston. He showed that when you actually oxidize or burn metals and you make sure you capture everything that's going on, the oxidized, or the calcine, they call it, is actually heavier than the original metal, and so we lost something. And it was worked out that in fact oxygen is not phlogiston coming out, is actually the basis of combustion, and the similarities of water with the heat being generated from the phlogiston. So, using Michael Faraday's term, phlogiston is now one of the bygone parts of science. And this is the way it works. You've had a theory, and it's stuck around for 70 years, seemed to explain quite a lot of the observations, but when you started finding things you didn't agree with, it's changed over to something else. The basic idea is actually still there, that you don't just say, as was just not long before this time, the idea everything's made of earth, air, fire and water. Aristotle said so, it must be true. But phlogiston is actually something you can make predictions with. You can say it's something related to actually phenomena that go on. Turns out it was the wrong explanation, but it wasn't too far. You know, phlogiston going out, oxygen going in are not totally dissimilar things. I said I didn't like this little dangerous thing, IST. Let me say a bit about that. Now, I'm a scientist, or maybe I was until 2 weeks ago, but there are many IST labels I don't like. For example, I'm not an evolutionist, but I'm also, as you know if you've read the title, I'm not a creationist. I'm having this the scientist bit because that's actually a job, if you like. It's an approach to problem solving, and it's proved very successful over the last few hundred years. The worry I have with other sorts of ISTs and the labels that they involve, they tend to be not methods of doing things, but preconceptions about the results you're going to get. And evolutionists and creationists are both prejudging the issue origins and making the observations fit into those prejudices. What do I mean by that? So these days, most biological scientists are also really thinking about it, evolutionists, evolutions of the assumption they live with all the time. And it's fashionable to include a section on evolutionary implications in basic biological papers. And I say it's fashionable because actually fashions have changed. Because there was a time when it was different. I showed you a bit of my first paper, which is about the Earth's magnetic field. One of the papers I referenced in that was by Edmund Halley. This is the oldest paper I've ever referenced in my life, from 1693. He was writing a paper about the cause of the change, the variation of the magnetical needle, the philosophical transactions of the Royal Society of London. He had a theory which implied that the Earth was actually hollow. And one of the problems he recognised was the difficulty that the Earth and the oceans would probably seep through it was hollow. And he had the solution. No man can doubt that the wisdom of the Creator has provided for the macrocosm in many more ways than I can either imagine or express. So God will stop water leaking through. This would not appear in a paper nowadays if there were. Yeah. So, all respect to Edmund Halley, I don't think this is actually a good way of fixing problems. This is very much the God of the gaps thing that is a bit of a danger. So what's the modern equivalent? Here's a paper I picked more or less at random. An atlas of over 90,000 conserved non-coding sequences provides insight into crucifer regulatory regions. 90,000 you probably understand. I'll explain. Crucifer is actually a group of plants. It includes such things as the cabbage and the broccoli and Brussels sprouts. Non-coding sequences are bits of DNA that don't actually do anything as far as we can see. They don't code for genes and produce proteins. Conserve means that in a lot of different species, a lot of different crucifer species in this case, so in cabbages and cauliflowers, sequences, their overall DNA sequences are pretty similar, but these bits are very, very similar in the different species. If you line all the DNA, the genomes up with these different ones, look at the sequence here, it's very much the same, almost identical as normal. And some of those sequences are called ultra-conserved, and they're identical in all of them. And what the point, one of the messages of this paper is that there's lots of these ultra-conserved sequences in the region of the genome that's concerned with embryonic development of embryos. And interestingly, these are crucifers, plants. In people as well, invertebrates, there's a lot of these non-coding, highly conserved sequences in the region of the embryos. And so, that's fine, that's very interesting. We might learn something useful about the process of embryogenesis by studying the differences between plants and animals here and learn some common features. But you can't stop there these days. You have to go off and say, what's the evolutionary implications? And actually run into trouble there in this paper. Probably a gift here to the people who don't like evolution. The obvious solution is there was a common ancestor, and the common ancestor had this pattern of non-coding regions around the embryogenesis. Plants went this way, people went that way, but kept that important bit because embryos are obviously important. That's a great theory, except, as I acknowledge in the paper, it doesn't work terribly well because the last common ancestor of plants and people was a single-celled organism, and they don't produce a lot of embryos. Still, evolution will fix it. Convergent evolution, that says in these two different strands we got the same thing happening. Isn't that a marvellous thing to see evolution do? So this is the evolution of the gaps, which we've got in the gaps, I'm sure. It's common quotation is Sobzhansky. He wrote an essay in 1973, "Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution." Interestingly, Sobzhansky was a devout Orthodox Christian. The term "the light of evolution" actually comes from Teilhard de Chardin, a Jesuit. So this is a statement from at least a couple of Christians and others have joined in with it. But with due respect to them all, I actually disagree. I mean, as I said, the similarities between plants and animals can actually make sense, helping us understand embryogenesis, quite regardless of any evolutionary story. That's not to deny that evolution theories have made a lot of useful connection and predictions, and there's a lot of value in there. And if you have to say, do I think evolution happened, I'd say yes, but I don't think you want to invoke this as a solution of everything that comes along, insist on everything fitting into that mantra. Particularly when you take it beyond biological areas, into areas where evolution can't be happening. A lot of papers on galaxies talk about the evolution of galaxies. Well, they don't evolve, they develop, but it's not evolution in the same sense as in biology. And of course, the origin of life can't come about by evolution because evolution doesn't start until you have reproduction. Yeah. So I'm not an evolutionist. It's not necessarily the explanation of everything. So I better get on to the topic of my talk and tell you what I'm not a creationist. So I better start by saying, well, I'm meaning by creationist. I'm sure people can argue with this, but this is basically what I'm not. So I think the focus of a lot of the creation arguments are on the first 12 books of Genesis, particularly the first two, the creation story, and all the various episodes leading up to the flood. And so my definition of a creationist is someone who wants to take those as literal history and require any scientific methods or scientific models will have to be constrained to fit into that understanding and that particular interpretation. So some bits of creation cosmology, and the famous one is Ushibasha. First day of creation began at nightfall preceding Sunday, October the 23rd, 4004 BC. And incidentally, before we leave on Ushibasha, people like Venerable Bede, who was a historian of the Anglo-Saxons, Kepler, who discovered the orbits of the planets, and Isaac Newton, all came up with similar ages for the Earth, given the information they had at that time. 4004 BC came by following through the Bible and other historical records where the Bible account runs out, and taking a date from the Jewish calendar. That's right, the historical records get the year. The date was taken from the Jewish calendar, the autumnal equinox, and autumn because the fruit was ripe. Now, this is incompatible with modern astronomical observations, so let's look at just a little bit on power cosmology. I'm not going to spend, I'm not going to go into great detail. I could spend all night talking about the details, but I won't. Stars, there are stars that seem much further away than 6,000 light years, and we wouldn't be able to see them if the universe only existed for 6,000 years in its current form. Getting those distances is a bit tricky. The furthest we can actually get today by parallax measurements, which is the most mechanical and obviously accurate one. And if you look at the Earth's orbit, going around its orbit, and look at the stars from here and there, and because they're all distributed in space, they seem to move and look against each other. Look around. At the moment, with the Hipparchus satellite, we've got measurements up to something like 500 light years, probably a bit less, reasonably accurate. That's quite a lot less than 6,000. However, the background stars, the ones we're saying, are still obviously have to be quite a lot further away. So there's a suggestion there's a big distance there. And then there are other methods, the standard candles, they call things called secret variables, which are, and you can actually look at the period of variation of the variable stars, and that tells you something about their brightness, and that's quite well established by a number of methods. Hipparchus actually measured parallax distances to those, to some of those secret variables that confirmed the model, actually with a slight shift in the curve there. So those standard candles actually are pretty accurate, and they're giving distances of millions of light years. And then we can use redshift, which if you interpret it as expansion of the universe, as generally is done, will give us distances. And there was a paper just recently about the furthest galaxy so far, about 13 billion light years away, something like the universe. Now, I'm sure if the creationists probably give lots of responses to that. There's a couple of ones that spring to mind, and I can't deal with everything today. One is obviously that God could create the light. He could have created the universe with the light travelling as if it had come from a distant star. It seems a strange thing for God to do, but it's a possibility. There's a number of versions of the theory that the universe beyond the solar system expanded rapidly on the fourth day of creation, and time dilation allowed the rest of the universe to be old while we're actually young. I don't think you could make that theory compatible with some of the observations of the way that the very regular pulsars pulsing would look different if that had actually happened in a short time in the past, 6,000 years in the past. And again, why would this happen? It seems a rather strange thing to do. So that's one aspect. I've been interested in astronomy for a long time, and it seemed like the astronomical observations were just inconsistent with the geology. This was actually, I was surprised when I started looking at this that it's fairly recent that we've actually known about this geological strata. In 1815, after quite a torrid time, William Smith published a map showing consistency in this sequence of underground strata across Great Britain. If you look at the cliffs in different parts and mines and so on, you find a very similar pattern of strata in the south and up in Scotland. And the different strata had different fossils with more primitive forms in the lower strata, which clearly suggested they'd been developed over time. The older ones were lower, and they got younger as they went up. And since then, there have been very similar findings around the world. There have been subsequently methods actually determining the dates of the strata, notably radiometric methods, looking at the pretty well understood decay rates of different radioactive materials. And these give pretty consistent results that the rocks are many millions of years old, There are creationists who question the science, but they tend to be cherry-picking, I fear, and most people have looked at these, well, cases where I haven't much of a look, they're looking at a few individual cases where there's actually reasons for the discrepancies, and the big picture of thousands of measurements is pretty clear and confirmed on multiple different methods. And that is what you expect. I mean, scientists don't actually accept results uncritically. They're not looking to prove the Earth is old, they're looking to find out what information is there. If someone could actually find real evidence that the Earth is 6,000 years old, they'd be working right now to get it out there and prove it and make their name. If the methods were really inaccurate and invalid, they'd have been following the phlogiston theory into the forgotten byways of science. So my conclusion was from both of these that the observations don't actually fit the model of a young universe. We've got a lot of evidence there that's suggesting the universe is old, so the most obvious interpretation of that is that yes, the universe is pretty old. Then there's biology. I said I'm not an evolutionist. So what do I think about evolution? Well, I showed you a paper on the genetic influences on cancer, so I had a bit to do in this area too. So organisms are, to some degree, controlled by their DNA sequence in their cells. It's not obviously deterministic, there's all sorts of other influences on the organism, but it's pretty important. And there are processes, including sexual reproduction in the higher animals, that allow these sequences to change, to mutation, and then for advantageous changes to be accumulated. So given enough time, and if you separate population groups in different ways, there's really nothing to stop evolution occurring. Now, part of the problem with really understanding this is just the incomprehensible size of the timescales involved. And this little table here, which I found useful to understand this a bit. So here's how many years ago things happened. The oldest person alive, born, let's say about 120 years ago, maybe less, down to the origin of the universe, something like 13 billion years or 20 billion years or something. A very large number here. Pretty hard to get those in your head. Now, there's 30 million seconds in a year. So if I take each of these year numbers and divide them by 30 million, we can get some sort of idea of what that time scale is on things that are a bit more familiar to us. So every year becomes a second. So this 120-year-old person, that was 2 minutes ago. That's a bit longer than this slide has been on the screen, the old tradition there. Australia was settled by Europeans 300 minutes ago. America was discovered a bit longer, nearly 9 minutes ago. Battle of Hastings, 1066, 15 minutes ago. Jesus was born about half an hour ago. So again, about the time I was starting this talk was when Jesus was born. Moses a bit earlier, about an hour ago, so he was about as long before then as we are after. And creation was 40 minutes before that. About the same again, I guess. There's evidence that the Aboriginal settlement of Australia happened around about 50,000 years ago. Again, that's most of these numbers are subject to quite a bit of variation, but they're right sort of order. So that would be 13 hours ago. So that's this morning at 6:30 was when the Aboriginals arrived in Australia. Where are we? The first humans, I've heard some of sapiens, again, you'll understand there's a lot of variability in this. 130,000 years seems to be something like the figure at the moment. That's about, a day ago. So a day and a half ago, in fact. So that was the morning of the day before yesterday. The first hominids, first humans, about 2 million years ago. That's 23 days ago, so quite a lot longer than that. So nearly a month ago. The last dinosaurs were about 2 years ago. The first dinosaurs about 7 years ago. So the dinosaurs were around for about 5 years on this time scale, and we've been around for how long? 13 hours. No, sorry. about a day. So we've been around for a day or so. Dinosaurs came and went over a 5-year period, quite a long time ago. Really hard well, it's easy to understand why our perceptions of what happens in timescales are quite different to these geological scales. First fossil shells are 17 years ago. Earliest fossil bacteria 100 years ago, 110. Earth was formed 142 years ago, and the Big Bang about 400 years ago. And that's a big difference to the that people have been around, and the 2 minutes that any of us, less than 2 minutes, any of us have actually alive. However, there is no direct evidence, as far as I can see, that evolution's occurred. People claim things, but we can't actually say we saw this evolving. All we get is rather scattered fossils. I mean, out of all the billions of animals, we have a few thousand fossils, and it's not surprising we can't get exact evidence. There is indirect evidence the way the fossil record is structured, with the more mineral at the bottom and getting more complex as they move up. And divergent populations of the species of Drosophila fruit fly in the world. There's some 600, a quarter of them exist only in Hawaii and nowhere else in the world. Explicable by the coming from an early ancestor that got there and separated from the rest of the world. And I think actually for me, one of the most convincing is why wouldn't it happen given all the building blocks are there for it to happen? DNA, recombination, mutation. So there's no direct evidence. If you like, you can not accept it. And I think what you have to accept if you don't is that each individual species was created more or less independently by special creation. It doesn't necessarily have to have been all at once on the 6 that have been spread over time, but some form of that is I don't see the only alternative. So what about the Bible? I understand that Christians are not in all this stuff that's in the Bible. When I read Genesis 1 to 12, they read to me as being myth, and I don't mean lies or...
Ian, I must say that you mean Genesis 1 to 11, because 12 starts with Abraham, and I think you'd agree with Abraham being...
1 to 11.
1 to 11, thank you.
Yeah. So I'll come back to Abraham in a moment. The stories that carry theological, philosophical truth, but they're not historical. Basically, when I say they read to me, that the characters are heroes or villains, black and white. You don't see much of them, except perhaps Noah taking part in normal human activities. And that's very much in contrast to the later ones, to chapter 12 we start with. Abraham, we hear about him moving around the place and having some strange experiences. Isaac and Jacob, we hear a bit more of their stories. If you look for these as history, you can find inconsistencies in the accounts. Straightforward reading of Genesis 1 and 2 as the animals created first in Genesis 1 and man created first in Genesis 2. You can fill with the wording if you like, but that's the straightforward reading. And it's been quite often said that Jesus quoted the Old Testament, particularly Genesis 1 and 2. And therefore we have to take them as they are, but I don't think Jesus using them is actually consistent with them being myth in the sense of theological and spiritual truth, because he's using the meaning. He used parables all the time to tell the truths that he was trying to get over. I put this next slide in just because I could. I think it was interesting being allowed to do it up there 2 years ago. This is the patriarchs out of Genesis 1 to chapter 12. Abraham is at the bottom. So I'm going to stand over. I'm not sure you're going to read the names. Here's Adam. He lived about 1,000 years from here to here. And this is the point we're told the age he had. Seth, his son, who actually made it through. He lived again nearly 1,000 years. Had a son at this age, Enosh, and so on. Worked through. So all the ones lived around about 1,000 years, except for Enoch, who didn't die because he was taken up by God, so he didn't. He just carried on. Poor old Methuselah, the oldest, he lived about 986, but if only the flood had been delayed another 40 years, he would have made it to 1,000, because he and his son Lamech. But it doesn't say they died in the flood, their ages coincide with the flood. And there's Noah and Shem, who were on the ark and made it through, and then all their sons. You can see after the flood, the ages, the lengths of their lives are starting to get shorter. And down here is Abraham, who became Abraham. One of the things that strikes me is that Noah was still alive when Abraham was born. Shem actually outlived Abraham, so it's mildly surprising to me that they don't get a mention in any of the stories that they decorated with someone else.
How old was Abraham?
171.
Yeah.
171, I think.
171,
The tables obviously has Noah dying before Abraham was born, and Shem dying during Abraham's lifetime.
Shem outlived Abraham.
Yeah, I consider on your table, I'm not saying other tables I have seen. Was a bit different.
I think it's right, but I'm always prepared to make correction. Scientific approach. This is actually drawn up from an Excel spreadsheet that's got all their ages when they were born and when their sons were born. So I didn't do the calculation, so I'm hoping it's right. I may have put the ages in wrong. So I just want to say I'm not alone in this. This is not a new view of the world as like the scientific era. Clemens, in the 2nd century AD, said that time was born along with things that exist, so he didn't actually believe in 6 days of creation. He thought maybe it was created at once, and it was only explained that way for help us understand. Origen was a bit rude, actually. He said, "Now, who is there, pray, possessed of understanding, that will regard the statement as appropriate that the first day existed without sun, even without sky?" So he was actually saying that you shouldn't take literally the scriptures. Mind you, there's lots of other things he said you shouldn't take literally as well. At least I'm saying it was an early view. And St. Augustine said that the day in Genesis was different from the ordinary day. So at least I have some support from other things, Christian figures. I would like actually to quote a bit more from St. Augustine, rather more than I generally would put on a slide. He expressed it so well. In matters that are so obscure and far beyond our vision, we find in Holy Scripture passages which can be interpreted in very different ways, without prejudice to the faith we have received. In such cases, we should not rush in headlong and so firmly take our stand on one side, that if further progress in the search of truth justly undermines this position, we too fall with it. That would be the battle not for the teaching of Holy Scripture, but for our own, wishing its teaching to conform to ours, whereas we ought to wish ours to conform to that sacred Scripture. I say amen to that. That's not rushing headlong and firmly take our stand, and I think, just Kevin was saying, that's what we're busily doing here, is not rushing headlong, we're having our stands and having talking about. I suppose I should say what I do believe, even if I said something about what I don't believe. Now, I certainly believe there's something very special about the Bible. It contains the account of the life of God come to earth, which is a very key event in the history of the world. And the Old Testament tells us much about how God dealt with the people to whom he was revealing himself up until that period. But it does say because it's so special, we have to be careful not to bring our prejudice to it. And I'm doing my best not to do that, not to say it has to be one way or the other, but to try and get information out of it. Also, the world I believe. The world is God's creation, and we can learn about it by studying it, and that's on a scientific side of life. But again, as the scientific method says, without bringing in our own prejudices, we will test those, and if other people have different ones, we'll try those out too. And another thing I believe is science can tell us about what is and about what was to some degree, and a bit of less about what will be. But what it can't do is tell you about the meaning or the purpose. And I was watching the video of the debates between Craig and Lawrence Krauss. And Lawrence Krauss gave a beautiful example of this. I'm sure he was not likely to be quoting it because it was a somewhat unguarded moment, but he's on a video, he's up there. Craig said to him, but what about things like Shakespeare? Now you can't just look at that scientifically. He said, well, Krauss, you can count the number of consonants. And that's really what I'm saying. You can get some information by science, but mainly not the meaning and the purpose. The example I was going to use before I saw that video was I think a church. It's the picture here. You can go in and study that and understand the construction methods and the refractive index of the glass of the windows and the different colours and all of that, and the thermal properties of the roof and so on, which will be terribly useful if you want to make sure that your voice could be heard, or you want to make sure you didn't get too cold in the winter. Tremendously valuable. But it actually wouldn't tell you what the church was for unless you actually brought something else in. The church, of course, it would be God. And I believe that something of God's purpose has been revealed in the history of the Jews, the Old Testament, and in the incarnation of God as Jesus. I'll say there's one problem I recognise with my position, and I don't know if I've got an answer for it, or if I will have. So I sort of think probably we came about by some evolutionary process. Want to tie myself for any particular one, but we weren't all created from Adam at the beginning. So when did we actually become this race that has a special relationship with God, made in God's image? I don't have an answer. I guess I would probably have to go back to William Halley and say I'm sure God's looking after it. But I mean, if I have to give what I think might be a possible answer, is at some point God chose to intervene into nature to link the physical and the spiritual worlds, and creating intelligent creatures with the self-awareness that we have, and with the ability to know Him and others as being separate selves. I think that's a unique thing to humans, and actually recognise others as being someone different to themselves. So, just to finish up, does it matter whether we're young earth creationists or not? As I say, I don't want to put barriers, but I'll have to say this is my personal experience. 1973, starting my scientific career and becoming a Christian. At that point, if I'd been told that the only way to become a Christian is to believe in literal interpretation of the creation in Genesis 1 and 2, I probably wouldn't have gone much further. I'd have found some other way to God, maybe I'd become a Buddhist or Muslim, I don't know. Maybe I've given it up entirely. And others today have a similar reaction. They say, surely you can't believe all that stuff. I think it's possible to combine a strong faith in Jesus with acceptance of scientific research, and we should avoid placing these stumbling blocks in the way. And the thing, I guess, is my consolation in all of this is we know Christians, we know Jesus is the truth, and one day we won't see puzzling reflections in a mirror through a glass darkly, but we'll see Him face to face, and then maybe we'll know the answer.
Thank you. I'd like to open up the discussion, but just an issue, issue like, would you like to have a break for supper first and then we'll come back together and have an open discussion, or leave the supper till later?
I wouldn't mind a toilet break.
All right, we'll have a break. Have a break. You can get there's a look up there, and we'll join back together around about 10 minutes' time. Oh, that'd be make it bang on 8 o'clock. All right.